This podcast presents the results of research on Chinese culture conducted at the SWPS University in Poland as part of the China Horizons research grant funded by the European Commission. The focus of our research is on understanding modern Chinese society through culture, looking at works exploring social issues and the way these issues are communicated to domestic audiences. Chinese cinematography is a huge business, even though it has not fully recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic, which hit the whole industry severely. By the end of 2024, box office revenue stood at nearly 6 billion USD, and about 80% of this revenue was from domestic films. There were 612 feature films produced in China last year. While the numbers are smaller than in previous years, this is still slightly more than the US and Canada combined, which in 2024 released 569 films. Even with such high numbers of films produced, the Chinese film industry's net worth is still no match for Hollywood, and yet it is a very important part of the Chinese cultural and creative sectors and a vehicle for narratives and content reaching millions of Chinese. The Chinese film industry functions within a system of control, which concerns all content that is meant for domestic distribution, be it films, books, music, video games, or stage productions. Today, we will take a closer look at the censorship system in Chinese cinematography to try and understand how the system works and how producers and directors learn to function within its boundaries. Joining me in the studio is Dr. František Reismüller, researcher in the field of Chinese film in the China Horizons SWPS University team. František, it's great to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you. Very glad being here.
Okay, we have a lot of things on my agenda. I would like to discuss both the legal institutional framework and also how things work in practice. So maybe we'll start with a more of a sort of systemic outlook of how actually the censorship system works in the film industry. So my first question to you would be this: which institutions really are responsible for censorship in the film industry?
Well, over the years, throughout the history, this changed a lot. But since 2018, there is this institution that is called China Film Administration, 国家电影局, which is not a 局, actually, not like an institution by itself, but it's basically a department, a part of the propaganda department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. And over the years, basically, the administration of film production has been placed under various institutions, but we can see the tendency to basically move it towards the center, moved it under the control of the central government and of the party.
But is this a move away from the executive and towards the party institutions? Because the propaganda department is part of the party structure, while previously, as I understand, the film directorate was part of the executive.
Exactly. Previously, it was a part of the wider administration that included also radio and television. But in 2018, they split it. So now there is an institution that is subordinated to the State Council that is responsible for the administration of radio and television. And there is a separate organ, let's say, that is called China Film Administration, placed under the propaganda department of the Central Committee of the CCP. So apparently they put a lot of stress on film production as such. And it is quite important to, look at the historical development that, of course, there has been censorship since the establishment of the PRC generally. But because, everything was state-owned and state-oriented and under the state control, including the studios and everything else. And even if you wanted to use any technology related to film, you were always in contact with the state. So I would say there was no need before for the censorship to have more exact rules, to be more in the hands of the party, because everything was controlled anyway. You wanted to shoot a movie, you were dealing with the state and you were dealing with the party. But then, especially after the fifth generation of movie makers who started to shoot films like Yellow Earth that were really socially critical, the need kind of came into existence to maybe control and to even pre-control what is being shot in China and how. And then in the early 2000s, also with the rise of the digital technology and with the possibility for the filmmakers to actually shoot independently with their own equipment, this was even more pressing. So I think this also kind of points towards the tendency to centralize the control over the film production.
Okay, so now it's as close to the party as possible. So now, since we know what institution is responsible for the whole process, now what is the legal framework, the legal basis for censorship? Where can we find documents that actually state how censorship in film should be proceeded?
Right now, there are two basic documents that are the most important documents for shooting a film, plus a third one that I will mention later. The first is from 2006, and it's called Regulations on the Registration of Film Scripts, Synopsis, and the Management of Films. And then in 2017, a film industry promotion law of the People's Republic of China was introduced. Now, from the first look, it seems that those documents are mutually exclusive, that basically one follows the other. But according to my research, this is not true. Both documents are still valid, and they are aimed a little differently, although a lot of the content is the same, basically. But if you are a filmmaker in China and you want to know basics about the censorship and about the framework you are working with, you have to count with both of those documents, because one is more about how you apply for a shooting of the film, and the second is more about how the state approaches film in general. Although, as I said, and we will talk about it later probably, some of the parts of the documents are very much the same.
Okay, and you mentioned the third document?
And the third document that is from 2017 as well, and that are the regulations on the administration of Sino-foreign cooperative production on films. So that's a special document that only concerns the co-production, basically, because there are special rules about how co-productive films can be made in China.
Okay, so we know that in previous years, because the quota for foreign films distributed in China was so narrow, many foreign producers, distributors thought that co-productions would be actually a good way to enter the Chinese market. And does this document make it easier or more difficult?
Well, it depends on how you approach it. There are quite strict rules. So first you need to get a permit, as with everything in China, basically. And none of those companies, be it the foreign one or the Chinese one, can be in the process of having a film prohibited at the moment. So not getting the permit before for any other of those films they made. Then the Chinese company must have released at least 2 permitted domestic movies. Of course, the film must be permitted in China first before it goes abroad. So that's basically the same rules as for domestic production. And that is quite important. The film must be shot in Mandarin, in Chinese, with subtitles in any foreign language. And only then, with the Mandarin version being approved by the Chinese authorities, it can be translated into any other language. Of course, there are other rules, but I think these are the most important because they, again, point that there is a strict control about what is produced in China.
Wow, the language thing is quite interesting. I haven't heard of it. So you actually cannot co-produce in China a film in English. It has to be in Chinese.
It has to be in Chinese first.
Okay. Very interesting. Now, so we know the documents, we know the institution, but what is actually the whole process like? Can you explain to us what sort of steps in the process are the most important?
Well, from this point of view, this is quite easy and straightforward. So first you go to the China Film Administration, but, and I forgot to mention this, on a provincial level. So as the audience probably know, in China, the state is organized in circles. The central circle is mirrored on the provincial and lower levels. be it from the state administration, from the government, or the party organization. So there is a central film administration, and then there is, of course, a provincial level. So with exceptions of films that deal with major historical topics or like major topics of national importance, let's say, you apply on the level of your province. So wherever your production company is based, there you apply.
Or municipality, I understand.
Yeah, well, it's a provincial level. So, or municipality in case of places like Beijing or Shanghai, of course. And then what you apply first is a synopsis. So before you get a permit for shooting the movie as such, there is this pre-censorship. So you basically submit a film plot synopsis of no less than 1,000 characters or words, or it could be longer. Sometimes you have to apply with the whole script if you deal with military or, as I said, some things of national importance or national history. But generally, art movie, let's say, you apply with a synopsis. They have a look at it and they give you a permit to shoot. These permits are public, actually. So you can actually basically find on the website of the China Film Administration if that or that film has a permit to be shot. I'm going to talk about it later because that's quite interesting. And then you make a movie and then you submit it for a review after it's done. Again, to the same institution, and then you wait. And usually you get back some opinions, maybe some suggestions for revisions. So you need to re-edit the movie and submit it again. Usually there is this like board of at least 5 professionals in film industry. Those guys, their names are not really public. But they are professors from universities. There are some producers, maybe even some filmmakers, such. Not really on the provincial level. Those guys are not really officials. They are really professionals. On the central level, in the propaganda department, that's more about really officials. So we go through the whole process, and then basically there are only 2 results. Either you get the permit or you don't. But sometimes you just wait for quite a long time and you never know when the result will be actually published, So some of the more complicated films, let's say, it took quite a long time for them to actually get a permit. The interesting thing is that if you really don't agree with the decision of the provincial film administration, you can appeal to the central government for another round of review. So there is a way how to appeal. I haven't really found any examples where this actually happened and it worked out, but the law states as such.
This is really interesting. First of all, the system maybe from the European context looks very similar to our peer review in academic research, where you're actually reviewed by people who are from basically the same field. So these are not necessarily officials that look at your film and look at your screenplay, but also people who make movies. This is really important, and this is very interesting. And the other thing that I find very interesting in what you say is that there is actually no interference in the process of filmmaking. So first, your screenplay, your synopsis is being checked, and then you are free to produce the film. And only after you produce the final product, you submit it, and then you see or check what the result is.
Exactly, that is how it works.
Okay, now, so we know the system. Let's talk about the content then. For many people in the West, censorship is about censoring political content. But in China, it's definitely a far wider range of things that are being censored. Could you explain to us what is actually being censored? What are the things that cannot be shown in Chinese films?
It is exactly as you say, it's not only about politics, but it's generally about society. So I mentioned before that are the 2 basic documents. the one from the 2017 and the one from 2006. I will start with the newer one because the newer one mentions so-called 8 prohibitions or 8 things that are prohibited that really must not, as it is said in the document, be in a film.
I love all these numbers, so it makes it all much easier to remember. So we have 8 prohibitions. Go ahead. I want to know what they are.
Yeah, we have 8 prohibitions, but those are very basic things, I would say. So it starts that it must not harm the state constitution. That's number 1, of course. The film cannot and must not endanger national unity, sovereignty, national integrity. It must not release state secrets, etc., etc. So those are really, really basic things that you would expect. You can't somehow shame national cultural traditions, incite ethnic hatred or discrimination. So that's also a thing that you would expect. But then it goes more towards the social. So one thing, and that is number 5, I'm not going to mention all of them, just to give some examples. So number 5 says, endangering social morality, disturbing social order, undermining social stability, promoting obscenity, gambling, drug addiction, exaggerating violence and terror, abetting crime or teaching criminal methods. This is actually quite interesting because if you think about this point, it says if there is too much crime or if it seems that you are basically showing understanding for any criminal behavior, you're wrong and you must not do that. Which, as we're going to talk about some examples later, this is happening and it can be happening in a proper social critical film or in a seriously taken genre film.
I can't imagine an action film or a gangster movie, you know, devoid of this content. It will be really difficult to make, and nobody would watch it.
Exactly. And then number 7, another interesting thing that must not be in the film: insulting or defaming another person, or violating the privacy of another person, infringing on the lawful rights and interests of another person. Again, this kind of seems, if you do a true story, you kind of, put yourself in a danger of infringing the rights of another person, basically. So you can't point to anybody who is actually a real person. At least that's how I understand it, and that's, how it actually works. And we've seen examples. And then, number 8, that's other content prohibited by laws and administrative regulations. So basically anything else that is prohibited. And there could be a lot of it, can't be shown in a movie.
Okay, so it's very vague. And we have number 8 in order to just fit in if there is anything else that slips by the first 7 points. And basically the interpretation belongs to the propaganda department. They interpret whether a specific content fits into one of these 8 points. Am I right?
Exactly. And then there's this 2006 document, still valid, as I said, that lists another 9 revisions, which means things that should be revised if they appear in a film and they are deemed harmful. Some of those things are very similar to the 8 points that I mentioned before. They only maybe develop the ideas a little bit more. So there are also quite interesting things like number 2, maligning the image of the military, armed police, public security, and justice.
Okay, so we can't have a stupid policeman in the film.
Yeah, or corrupt, for that matter, right? So that's also quite interesting. And then there is number 4, which is something that I personally consider the most interesting point in the 9 revisions. in all its vagueness and kind of very judgmental approach to reality, because it says that it is suggested to revise things that reverse the values of truth and falsehood, good and evil, and beauty and ugliness. That's how it starts with. And then it also talks about strongly exciting scenes of murder, bloodshed, violence, drug use, gambling. We heard it before. Excessively frightening and horrifying images, dialogue, background music, or sound effects. So this is, I don't know what is excessively horrifying, and I don't know who is the judge of what is ugly and what is beautiful. But it certainly gives a lot of space for the censors to kind of step in and evaluate a movie.
Let me try to rephrase it. So the stipulations suggest that what should be created in films are things that are beautiful, mild, do not shock, do not make people feel uneasy, and generally give you this nice, sweet feeling. And everything else is maybe subject to scrutiny and some cuts by decision of the propaganda department. That gives a very, very small space for creators of films, actually. It's really difficult to imagine a film that fulfills all of these criteria.
Exactly. And then, of course, if you compare it to practice, these rules are bendable always. In both directions, as we will see later. And the same goes for actually number 5 of these 9 revisions that says that you should revise a film when it is promoting negative and decadent views of life and values, deliberately exaggerating national ignorance of the dark side of society. Again, it depends. What is the dark side of society? What is a decadent life? Who actually makes the decision when you are too decadent? This is also quite vague and quite open to interpretation. Of course, number 9 are the others, prohibited things. But I wanted to mention one more. That is number 7, because that doesn't really appear in the prohibitions, really. And that is promoting the destruction of the ecological environment, animal cruelty, hunting, killing, and eating state-protected animals. This is not bad, actually, and it's quite interesting that already in 2006, this environmental point of view was mentioned in the rules. I mean, I'm not saying it's good to have such rules, but I'm saying, it's not always directed to the wrong direction.
Okay, that's also very interesting. So there was this feeling that films should promote positive attitudes and positive behaviors, and if you kill and eat an animal that is being protected, that's definitely not positive. So by extension, if you take drugs or if you beat up other people on the street, you shouldn't show it in the film because somehow it influences people's attitudes, and you might have more people fighting on the streets or doing bad things, taking drugs, etc. So I understand that if we think about these rules positively, this is the sort of a spirit that is in these regulations.
Yes, exactly. And that is actually, the other point of view. So there are things that are prohibited and there are things that are suggested not to appear in the movie. But it is important to mention that, the system of film administration in China works also in a positive way, in a sense that there are things that are recommended.
Okay, so that makes me curious. So what is recommended?
You can't really, you can find it in those documents that I just mentioned, and I'm just going to quote examples, but you also have to take into account the general ideological settings of China. And, things like China Dream and things like the Great Rejuvenation of Chinese Nation. Those things are generally supported to appear in arts as such. And, you know, that's why people very often draw the line between Mao Zedong from 1942 and his talks at the Forum of Literature and Arts, and how the current leadership of the CCP approaches arts and literature. So it's always serving the people, serving the politics, serving the goals of the party, and more nowadays than before. And that's also how we have to look at it. So it's not only a list of things that are prohibited, it's also a list of things that are recommended. And now, for example, the 2017 document in Article 36 states that the state supports the creation and production of the following films. Number 1, major films that spread the excellent Chinese culture and promote the core socialist values. Films that promote the healthy growth of minors. Films that showcase artistic innovation and promote artistic progress. That's quite interesting, because that opens somehow a space for art house films and maybe experimental films as well. But also for, you know, what maybe China is in leadership right now, and those are animated movies, because that's a very big boom in China right now. Films that promote the development of scientific education and the popularization of science and technology. And of course, number 5, other films that comply with national support policies, which are what I just mentioned, Chinese Dream and whatnot.
So this is the Yan'an part, the 1942 part.
Exactly, exactly. Also, I found another example, which was a speech of Wang Xiaohui, who is now, I think, the head or the, you know, the party head of Sichuan province. But back until 2022, he was the head of China Film Administration. And in a speech given in 2021, he basically said that Chinese films should push realism. So again, we are where we were with Chinese arts throughout the whole existence of the People's Republic. Realism is the thing. But then again, and that's the vagueness of, that's the general vagueness that we can see in such proclamations. Realism is only good until it infringes the rights of other persons. Meaning, if it's too realistic, then you might have a problem.
You can't be too truthful.
That's where the Chinese filmmakers need to kind of balance. Find something that does not really go against those vague rules, and at the same time, there are at least some elements that kind of support the other policies of the government or the CCP. And that is the same thing, of course.
Yeah, you told us how vague all of these stipulations are. So can you show us maybe some examples of films that were censored for content that seemed quite benign, content that seemed quite okay with the regulations?
First, before I go into the examples, I must mention one thing. You basically never know, it's not public, if something was or wasn't censored. You can find some information on various forums and in blogosphere and on Weibo that mention films being somehow postponed or held before releasing, or also films that seemed okay and then they were banned after. That is also quite important thing. Speaking of vagueness, you can have films that actually got the permit and then were never released, or were released and then they were pulled from the theaters. So nothing is sure in this system. You have very famous directors and nobody's safe. So when I prepared the examples, I have here Zhang Yimou's 1 Second, which is a film that is not from modern times. It's from the Cultural Revolution, but it's a personal story. Generally, the topic is not the Cultural Revolution itself, that's just a setting. And it kind of got the permit, then went to Cannes, then was pulled from Cannes for technical reasons. And then it was re-edited, reshot, and allowed to Chinese cinemas just a few years later. And basically nobody really knew the reasons why they permitted it at first. And then somebody must have come and told, no, maybe, you know, this image of Cultural Revolution, we don't like it that much. With the historical topics, that is always a problem. Also, anything crime related that could somehow seem that is too close to the reality. Quite, again, Zhang Yimou and his Under the Light. That film took 4 years to get through the censorship system. He had to make like dozens of edits in the movie, and the final result is 53 minutes shorter than the original. And actually, you know, the main star, Zhang Guoli, quite famous Chinese actor, actually his character was originally the chief of police, but after the film was released, his position, the character's position was vice mayor. That also says something, and we saw it in the 9 revisions that, you know, police shouldn't be shown in a bad way. And this actor, he actually refused to see the movie because he said this is not the original, and I don't want to have anything, you know.
Wow. And as you said, that's also the case with the really famous producers and directors. I mean, Zhang Yimou is like the most famous director in China, a guy who was orchestrating the celebrations of the Beijing Olympics, who seemed to be very, very on a really good footing with the Communist Party of China. And even for him, making a movie in today's China is a challenge.
It is. And then, you know, I have some examples of Chen Kai-ke, also 5th generation, very famous director. He still has a film that is also about somehow more like a personal story of growing up, historical setting as well, still pending. No permit in sight. We can talk about the famous guys from the 6th generation, Jia Zhanghe. Basically, none of his movies goes without problems, but that is a good example of his 2013 movie Touch of Sin, movie famous for its violence, actually. And he got the permit. He got the permit to show the movie in international festivals, and he got the permit, you know, the so-called Dragon Seal, to show it domestically, but the film was never released. There are a lot of examples, but then I'm going to give you another example, which is from the other side of the spectrum of films. And that is a film called 800. It's a historical film about, you know, like a group of Kuomintang soldiers being in the front lines near Shanghai, you know, like last resort against the Japanese invaders. And even this film had problems releasing because the censors thought that, you know, maybe we should not promote Kuomintang that much, you know, we should make it more about the heroism of Chinese nations, and not to say that those soldiers, because it was 1937, Shanghai weren't really soldiers of the People's Army, that didn't exist at the time in today's form. And then, of course, there were subtitles edit at the end of the movie stating that under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, the Chinese nation was then united and achieved national liberation, you know. So we suddenly moved from 1937 to 1949. And those are the small edits. Otherwise, the film, it's a propaganda film, of course, about Chinese history, but it's quite, you know, highly valued because it's realistic, it's brutal, but, you know, war is always brutal. And of course I've seen it, and it's not a bad film, but, you know, even film like that, it was actually pulled from a domestic festival, from Shanghai International Film Festival, which is one of the biggest ones in China. And of course, again, technical reasons, that's what they always say. For technical reasons, it was pulled after the approval to be shown, and it was re-edited, and then only then it was released to general public.
Okay, how fascinating. Since we have so many stories of these big productions by really, really big names, how can you make a movie in today's China showing some sort of a social critique if you are not such a great director, if you are not the most famous person from the 5th generation of movie makers in China? Are there people who still try and show some elements of truth of what is happening in China? And if how do they attain it? How do they do it?
I want to mention one thing. Not all films that show signs of social critique must go against the 8 or 9 rules. There are many aspects of Chinese society, and not all of them must concern crime or nation or decadent life or something like that. That's one thing. The other thing is, and I've already mentioned it before and just want to repeat it, you have no way of finding out if there was a problem with the censorship, what those problems were, if there were some, what was edited and what wasn't, and that is also important, if it wasn't self-censorship. So maybe those things that you probably think that they were made because of censorship were self-censorship, because people already know the framework they are creating within. So that's quite, important to say.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned self-censorship, because we need to be aware that in order to make a film, you need to find a lot of funds. And people who invest these funds want to get returns from the box office. And if the film, ends up on a shelf or is being censored and redone again and recut and redone and recut, then you're just losing money. And it's a really competitive business. So I guess everybody wants to see the film in the cinemas as soon as possible.
Exactly as you say. And the thing is, then the only thing you can do is like empirical research and make like an empiric deduction from trends that you see. So you see crime movies, almost always they end with a postscript that explains that according to law, everybody was punished, that explains which law were implemented to actually deal with the problems that are shown in the movie, etc., etc.
Okay, so there is an educational aspect as well. So if you're a moviegoer, you can actually learn that some actions of the bad guys in the movie were punished according to a certain law, and you learn about the legal system. Is that true?
Exactly.
That's very interesting. I don't think we have this in American movies.
Or you can learn what policies were implemented to actually deal with problems that weren't dealt with before when the things that you are describing were happening. So, for example, a film about like new media and, the things that you are, making very shocking stories on the internet, and you are, just to gain likes and followership. That movie was ended with an explanation that there was a law implemented that basically forbade those, fabulated stories that you put out there only to gain likes and followers. Or there was this film about basically the Chinese version of the Dallas Buyers Club, about cancer drugs being too expensive in China, and this like a civic initiative to make them more affordable. And also this film ends with the explanation that even thanks to this film, actually, some policies were implemented so that the drugs for curing some kinds of cancer are more available even for the lower classes of people.
Okay, so you learn not only about the law, but you also learn how effective the Communist Party is and local governance, how good it is, so that it deals with problems even because of the film, and you learn about it from the film. So I guess the policies were implemented really fast.
That's one thing, yeah. And you also learn that, no bad deed goes unpunished, and that you shouldn't have like understanding for the bad deeds. That's one thing, that I personally find the most problematic. So, of course, China is a centralized system. There is a certain kind of ideology, and the system wants to promote itself. So I can understand that if they really implemented some policies, they want to show it, and they show it in the postscript of a movie. But I repeatedly mentioned the example of Shen Yu's movie, The Old Town Girls, which is about kind of like an estranged mother trying to connect with her daughter, and then in the end they commit a crime together because they need money. The mother is somehow involved with mafia, so they kidnap a schoolmate of the daughter, and they try to, you know, like blackmail somebody. Of course, this film ends with that everybody was punished according to the law, you know, because they committed the crime and they should be punished. The thing is that the rules for the censorship basically state that you cannot show sympathy for the criminals, if I can interpret it like that. But movies like this are made for that, actually. So you find yourself in dire straits and you deal with it somehow. You're desperate and you commit the crime. And, you know, the audience is supposed to feel a little bit sympathetic to those characters, to at least think, you know, that even in China, life can kind of push you over the edge to do something illegal. And there are many movies like that. From Jia Zhangke, they have, he has like 3 or 4 movies that actually deal with the same topic. But you still, you know, you have to add the thing that, you know, those were still crimes and they were punished. And that somehow softens the sympathy that you could feel as audience for the characters.
How interesting. So now you can't have too much sympathy for people who commit crimes, even though you learn from the whole film that their lives were very difficult and you would naturally sympathize with them. Okay, before we wrap up, can you tell us maybe some other instances of movies that surprised you in the way the social critique is shown, or maybe they surprised you because the censorship system seemed very loose in this particular instance? Anything that you feel makes us see the system as being very, very subjectivized and very, very flexible?
What is more surprising to me is how maybe schematic it can be at times. So, as I said, if you do the empiric deduction and you see the trends, so we just mentioned crime movies, postscripts, that's basically always there. And then you have corruption, for example. So, and also the trend is easier. You never mention the highest positioned people that are somehow influenced on corruption. That's always a vice something, or a lower manager or something like that. And you know, that's already a trend. That's always like that, you know? And in this sense, it makes it quite easy to avoid the censorship because you know you have to do it.
So you play by the book.
And another thing, and that I find very interesting. And during the years, last 2 years that I did the research in Chinese films, it really like diverted my attention to completely another group of movies. So at first, you know, I was trying to find a serious movie, serious social critic movies. And suddenly I found out, look at the comedies. The comedies show much more of a social critique than the serious movies. Because they end well, always. Comedies tend to end well. They're funny. But then there is this another layer that can actually show a lot of problems, a lot of pressures in the society. And it doesn't have to be necessarily something that goes against the censorship rules, but still, it is there. And maybe the funny take on social criticism is something that is a definitely trend in China.
So if you want to learn about the Chinese society, you want to learn the truth, watch comedies.
Yes, it certainly seems so, yes.
Right, František, before we sum up, can you tell me very quickly, how do you think the censorship system influences the cinematography in China then? So we talked a lot about the system, and what is the result?
I think it influences the whole segment quite a lot. And I'm gonna give one last example that is just a few months old. So there were 3 films from very famous Chinese directors, young and old. Geng Jun, which is, you know, like a new guy for the past few years, but very famous. One Chinese professor of film told me that for her, that is one of the biggest talents lately in China. Lo Ye, that is, you know, 6th generation director, very famous. And Wang Xiaoshuai, the director that is behind So Long My Son, a very famous movie. So these 3 guys went to Taipei to the Golden Horse Festival a few months back, and they won a lot of prizes. None of these films were actually approved for screening in international festivals outside mainland China. The Kunqin's film deals with homosexuality, which is something that will never be, shown, although it is not mentioned explicitly in the rules. And the Loyes film that's about COVID, it's called Unfinished Movie. It's kind of like a meta movie, but it never got the approval. And the Wang Xiaoshuai, that's like a historical film that actually, kind of deals with parts of Chinese history the party doesn't like that much. But it's a personal movie, basically. And only the last one, the Wang Xiaoshuai movie, which is called My Land, got a permit to be actually shot. Not a permit to be screened, but, the synopsis was submitted and it got the permit. So you can see that even very famous directors, very successful directors, maybe they are even like fed up with the rules, and they say, I want to make a movie according to my liking. And if I'm not able to do it officially, maybe I will do it unofficially. So that is one thing. And the other thing is that a lot of secondary sources I found, and not so old actually, like from 2021 and back, I found this idea that sometimes the censorship is not as harsh on those filmmakers who tend to be famous abroad, because China wants to export these stars, and wants to have the Chinese movies shown in international festivals. That is not true anymore. They control a lot what is shown outside. And, like 10, 20 years back, yes, it was that. The directors made a movie, didn't apply for approval, and then went abroad and then dealt with the consequences later. Now it is not as easy as it was. And I think the space is shrinking, and the guys, the directors, be it less famous or more famous directors, they all feel it in China.
That's not a very positive note to end our meeting, but I guess we still have the option of Taiwan, as you said, some space available for directors to show the movies at the Golden Horse Awards and show them to at least the Taiwanese audiences. Thank you very much, František. I think that was really interesting and showed us a little bit about what the system works like and how it looks and works in practice. So very much for your insight.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to all the listeners. You were listening to a podcast presenting research on Chinese culture conducted at the SWPS University in Poland as part of the China Horizons Research Grant funded by the European Commission. My name is Marcin Jacoby, and it was my great pleasure to be the host of today's meeting. Thank you and goodbye.